All right. What we're going to do the first part of double dies versus doubling. And what this is going to be is it's just going to be about double dies tonight. And it's quite inclusive. I added material. I went ahead and looked up additional pictures. So here we go. Basically, double dies are actually several impressions from the coin hub to make a coin die. If the min employee does not align the hub perfectly above the coin die, a second impression will result on the coin die. And that is slightly off center usually, as you can see with these pictures here. And they're two identical images, but they're a little bit off from each other. And all this started, the whole deal with the double die started with the 1955 Lincoln cent. Well, actually the wheat cent. The strikes double dyed the coins as a partial or a full impression. Sometimes it's not the whole coin. Sometimes, like here, it's the date, or it can be the Liberty on the obverse of the coin. But doubling occurs from mistakes in the die hubbing process. And I'm not going to get into a great amount of detail with that because we're going to talk about that when next month I do one on how coins are made. But the misalignment or mismatch occurs between a first and subsequent hubbing and sometimes during the course of just a single hub. There's actually two types, and that's design mismatch and misalignment. The mismatch results of a design mismatch are variously characterized as distended, distorted, modified, and design hub doubling. Misalignment can occur along three orthogonal planes, meaning right angles, and three axes, actually right angles, having a set of mutually perpendicular axes. So that means that you could have that anywhere on that 90 degrees. And double dies that are a result of misalignment are variously characterized as rotated, offset, pivoted, or tilted. Now there's actually 8 classes of double dies. But first I want to look at what causes a mistake a little more. See, that's an actual hub. And the hub, by definition, is a positive or relief that is a raised image of the coin's design that has been impressed into a solid steel shaft during the process of creating the tools that are required for making coins. Master dies are then copied using special extremely high pressure squeezing and hydraulic force to create the numerous working dies or working hubs, simply called hubs. Then from the hundreds of working hubs, the mint creates the working dies, commonly called dies. It is from these working dies that our coins are actually struck. Now we talked about having either mismatched or misaligned are your two basic categories. So that's basically what breaks down double dies. So let's look at the first 4 classes. First 4 classes of double dies are rotated hub doubling, distorted hub doubling, design hub doubling, and offset hub doubling. I challenge any of you to say hub doubling about 4 times and see how well you do. Basically, class 1, the rotated, is pretty interesting. It's just a general overview. We'll talk about it more when we get to it. Results when the die receives an additional hubbing or striking that is misaligned in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. And class 2, to distort it, results when the hub's design moves towards the rim between hubbings. Class 3, to design uh, doubling results when a hub bearing a different design stamps a die bearing a different design. What that would be, and these are extremely valuable, when a cent and a dime both strike the same surface, the dies for them. Doesn't happen often, that's why they're so rare. Class 4, the offset results when the die receives an additional hubbing that is misaligned in an offset direction. And then we've got another set of classes, and they are pivoted, which results when the die receives an additional hubbing that was misaligned via rotation with a pivot point near the rim. Distended doubling is when the die receives an additional hubbing from a hub that was distended, meaning that it's might be starting to wear, it might have been a bad master, but it's just not giving a nice clear stamping, and you'll see that when we get into each one of these. And tilted is when a die or hub is tilted during the hubbing process. Okay, all sounds dandy, but now let's look into the real meat of it. Okay, what we're looking at is rotated hub doubling this clockwise. Okay, now you can see that your first one's here, second one's off to the right. And you see that there's a clear doubling. It's as it says, a 1972 cent, which is actually Wechsler double die obverse #1 for that particular coin. Point of rotation for the hub or die is usually created in regard to the center of the hub die. However, it could be somewhere between the center of the hub and the rim. Exactly what happens in the multiple squeeze hubbing process. See, like I've talked about before, you've got a hammer and anvil with your actual coin press, and they hammer against each other. Now a lot of them are upright. They used to be this way, and you used to have a lot more errors when it was this way. But the single squeeze hubbing process, the rotational movements between the hub and the die are still possible as the single squeeze is taking place. Can be in a clockwise direction or a counterclockwise, and subsequent hubbings almost always penetrated more deeply into the face of the die than the previous hubbing images that are present on the coin itself. So what's happening is the original hubbing off to the left here is actually a bit stronger than what this one is. And this misalignment was due to a clockwise rotation, and the misalignment was due to a counterclockwise rotation. There's both kinds, but this is clockwise itself. So let's look at counterclockwise. Now you see here, the images are even spread more because this is even more out of alignment. This is a 1955 cent, which also carries a Wechsler double die obverse, a DDO. And it makes it interesting because this you can see with the naked eyes. Some of them you can't, they're almost right on top of each other. So you have to really be careful with this. And remember, with doubled die, you have a sharp, very sharp image. Both of them are, and there's usually notching somewhere in the doubling itself. With machine doubling, what you have is more of a rounded stair step. There's not the clear, sharp doubling of the different design elements. So just keep that in mind when you look at them, and you'll see and begin to identify the two. I don't always get them right the first time. I have to look at them and look at them and look at them. When you got 71-year-old eyes the way I do, it takes a bit more looking and a lot more magnification. But that's what I do. And then I compare it against existing pictures and try to see if there's any similarities. Okay, class 2, the distorted hub doubling. Now here we see a 1946 San Francisco Mint cent that's also a Wechsler DDO. And during the multiple squeeze hubbing era, which was for the most part earlier than 1981, 1982, after a working die received an impression from the working hub, it needed to be annealed or go through that heating process that allows a stronger bond between the alloys, if there's multiple alloys, before the next impression was made. And the Mint has said, and independent research has confirmed this, that during the annealing process, when the die was heated to soften it, the die would expand from the heat. Well, what do you think happens when the die expands from the heat? Then you're going to have a more distorted doubling. If you look here, you can barely see the doubling on this, and the distortion is, you can see around the edges. See where it's not real clear? There's a sort of a breakdown on some of the edges. That's caused from that expansion of the die. But as it cooled, it was supposed to return to its original diameter. However, this didn't always happen. All the class 2 double dies should have the doubling spread towards the center, but again, there's exceptions to this. And sometimes it will display doubling that is spread either towards the center, which this has done, it's coming down towards the center, or has spread towards the rim. So this one's a harder case to be actually pick out, the class 2. And it may be one class of double dies successfully eliminated when the Mint changed over to the single squeeze hubbing process. Variables in play produce the inward and outward spreads simply are not there any longer because you don't have that heating of the actual coin that's being struck, and it doesn't pass the heat onto the actual die itself. Now you have to remember the heat can go up to 1500 degrees or more during the annealing process. So that can really pass the heat along quickly, and since it's solid steel, that will heat up nicely, and then you'll get almost a warping sensation from the coin itself. Okay, class 3 is the design hub doubling, and shown here is a proof 1952 quarter with the reverse. It's a DDR001 according to Wechsler's die varieties. And this to me is the easiest class of double dies to explain and understand. Some of the others, even the first two, might sound like that I'm walking all over the words I just said, because it's difficult to put into words what they are. That's why I try and use more of the pictures. But it's produced when a working die receives impressions from working hubs bearing two different or partially different designs. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be two coins or two denominations. What happened here is you have a wide ES and a closed ES. The closed ES is on the bottom, the YES is on the top, as you can see, because there's part of your S sticking up right here. So this is the easiest one to explain. And again, this happens still in single squeeze, but not as much. You're not going to find as many errors after 1981, 1982 as what you did previously. You're still going to find some, but mostly you're going to find varieties, or you're going to find machine hubbing, uh, machine doubling. So you're not going to see this as much as you used to. And again, this is from 1952. So see where the uh, close ES is on the bottom, the wide ES is on the top. Okay, moving on to class number 3. Class number 3 is design hub doubling, and there's a few different types. Now this one's going to be over dates. Now what you got, a 1942 1901 dime. I don't know whether any of you have ever seen one of these, but I've actually had a chance to hold one. I wanted it so bad, but my pocketbook said no way. But it's a beautiful coin to look at. My, look at how that happened. You had two different designs, and the 1941 stopped here, and when they put the 1942 in, you can't see too much doubling on the 1, 9, and 4, but you see the whole number 2 just to the right of the 1. And so actually how this happened, the quality assurance wasn't real good in the mint in the early days. And back during this time too, they were having to put the dates on individually on each one of the dies. They weren't actually engraved into it, so you get a lot more errors. But this is one of the coolest errors for me anyway. But the overdates is the most common, and I just love this coin. I could sit here and look at that the rest of the night. I wonder how much it would cost me now compared to what it would have cost 20 or 25 years ago when I actually had one in my hand. Okay, class 4, offset hub doubling to the north. Okay, remember you're going to look at the axis this way, north being up here, and then the other directions fall where they normally would. So north is always pointing straight up towards the top of the coin. So what you got here is a 1983 cent with a double die reverse, and it's on the 1 and it's on the cent. This happens when the centers of the hub and the die are not in alignment during one of the hubbings. The obverse die is slightly offset. The overlapping images or doubling will occur spread in the same direction as the die. Now this one, it would be the reverse die because it's on the back of the coin. But you see where the doubling actually is pointing upward. You can see how it changes in each one and starts to point more upward and directly towards north, but the further away you go from it, it's not quite pointing the same exact direction. That's because the actual alignment of that particular design itself. Okay, moving right along again. Here's the same offset hub doubling set to the southwest. Shown as a 1936 cent. It's a double die obverse, according to Wechsler, and he doesn't get stuff wrong too often. It produces when the centers of the hub and the die are not in alignment during one of the hubbings, the same way as the other. But you notice the direction that it points into. Yeah, if you're looking at this, you would have north, south, east, and west. So this is starting to point out this way here. So you can see where the doubling is. You can see especially on the T and on the Y, how it's going down a little bit. It's going south, but not totally south. South, but not totally south. Now these you can usually see with a 20 power magnifier, and sometimes with those of you with better eyes than I have, You can actually see them from the naked eye viewpoint. But all these double dies are so neat. And I have to stress again, it's not a double die, it's a doubled die. A lot of people get that name wrong, and it causes people who are in the coin community who are set in their ways, they get rather upset by this because I've seen some interesting arguments about it. But anyway, it is the official name. Okay, class 5 is the pivoted hub doubling. Shown here is a 1955 Descent as a double die obverse, and it's very similar to class 1. If you put a class 1 and a class 5 next to each other, you'll see a lot of similarities. Class 1 double dies have their doubling spread in either a clockwise or a counterclockwise direction. But in the class 5 double die, the pivoted hub doubling, the point of rotation or pivot point will be somewhere along the rib of the hub die alignment. And when we're looking at this one, we're looking at a 12-hour clock, with 12 being straight up in the air. And that's where you refer to where it's located by referring to where it would be on a clock. If the pivot point is at 12, there will be no doubling at 12, and the strongest doubling will be at 6. So the 6 hours on the clock, or the 6 points on the clock, is usually what separates. If it's at 12, the heaviest will be at 6. If it's the pivot is located at 3 o'clock, the heaviest will be at 9 o'clock. Now shown, the pivot point here was at approximately 4. It's a counterclockwise spread is the strongest on this design element nearing the rim at 2 o'clock. So your 2 o'clock would be way over here. And so those would include the letters of trust and the date. The rest of the coin wouldn't necessarily be affected by it. But again, if this was, the pivot point was at 4 o'clock and the nearest design elements on the rim were at 2 o'clock, that's where it would start. But actually your strongest would be where? 10 o'clock. It'd be 6 points or 6 hours difference. So that's the biggest difference in class 1 and class 5 double dies. They look similar, but they're not really. They're close. I call them brother and sister once removed. Okay, class 6, the distended hub doubling. Now look at these numbers on this 1943 cent. It's a double die obverse. See how fat the numbers look? That's what it means by the distended hub doubling.
I'm actually not seeing anything. I mean, I'm just looking at your voice and your talking, but
Okay. Is this any better?
no. Does anybody else see any coins?
I just see his presentation. That's all I see.
Yeah, and that's where the coins are at, right on the presentation.
Yeah, that's the only thing I see.
Got it.
The
Okay, I had the wrong
1943.
screen up. I got it now. Thanks.
Okay. With this, you see how fat the numbers are. This is from that distended hub doubling. It's classic, a very strong example of a class 6. The double die variety showing extreme extra thickness to the date, especially the lower 9, but I think the 4 is pretty distended as well. But this is another fairly easy one to explain and an easy one to pick out. Okay, let's move on to class 7. Let's see what we got here. Modified hub doubling. Whoops. I even used a slide of a coin that had arrows on it to make it easier for us to look at. It's a 1970 Denver cent. It's a double die obverse. Now, what do we mean by modified? What you've got is you've got a similarity doubling to the 7. So you can see the doubling up on top. But it also shows doubling up here on the O, which is not seen on the 2 previous varieties we just looked at. But your modified normally, not 100% of the time, there's always exceptions to this. Normally that modified hub doubling will show on the top of the date. Once in a while, you'll get it down here on the mint mark, but mainly it's on the date and it's either the first 2 numbers or the last 2. That's what I've seen with a lot of consistency. But you can see how it's just modified ever so slightly.
Anybody else lose the lead there for a minute?
Yeah, what?
I lost him.
Yeah, I lost him too.
Wait a second.
There you are.
Back again? Sorry, this is what's happened with that electrical outage. It's messed up the internet a little bit, but I thought I had straightened out. Okay, but you see up here, it's usually up to the top. It's either the last 2 numbers of the date or the first 2. And once in a while, you'll see it down here on the mint mark. Okay, everybody with me now? Good. Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
How many 1970D cents do I have to check before I'll find one? Are we talking like, there's 20 of them known, or is there hundreds of them known?
With this one here, there's probably, from what I recall, about 50 to 75 known.
Okay. Because I've got rolls of 70Ds I can go through. They're all mixed dates.
Yeah, you might hit it or you might not. But have I seen this? Yeah. I've seen this a couple of times when I've gone through cents, and that's just taking rolls from the bank and going through them. Okay, double die class number 8. This is one of my favorite classes, especially with this example. It's the tilted hub doubling. 2005 quarter from Minnesota. There's probably 100 or more of these, Sean.
Thank you.
All different types with just this type of tilt to them. Now this is the best example to look at to show you the tilting, because some of the others, you're looking at one of the other design elements and it might seem tilted. Like some of your older coins, you'll see the mint mark in all different directions. That doesn't mean that it's tilted hub doubling. Again, for the older coins, it's the way that it was applied. But this one here on the 2005 quarter, I like this one. This is about the easiest one to find and the one that's the most common. The other ones are hard to pick out. I have trouble picking them out. Sometimes I'll vacillate and go between maybe a class 8 and a class 5 or even a class 1. And I look at it again and think, no, that's not really it. But what happened around that third complete tree to the right of the state outline is the target area for the double dies produced on these quarters. Once again, the hub most likely resistant moving back into the normal vertical alignment at the start of the hubbing and snapped back into the alignment as hubbing is progressing rather. See, with these dyes, they come down or they come together now. When they come together, there's vibration because there's multiple tons of pressure applied to these coins. So if there's even the slightest amount of vibration, you're going to get some sort of double die. And with this one here, you got a tilted tree, and this is the only time that anything like this appeared as far as a design element that stands out so clearly. Another one would be the Wisconsin, I believe it is. You've got that extra ear, and that would possibly be tilted as well. There's not as many of those, but there's a lot of them with the extra leaf to it. You look at the 2009 set of the Lincoln Sense. There's a lot of DDOs and a lot of DDR varieties on there, and some of them look almost tilted. I can't say with authority, and I've looked it up, and no one else has claimed it to be. So I lean towards the people that know a bit more than I do about this. But it's an interesting one to look for. I enjoy it.
Where do you look for it on the 2009, Penny? Or something?
On 2009, the thumb, the book, the foot, it depends on which of the four it is, whether it's the 1, the 2, the 3, or the 4. The 4 is the presidency. The 1 is in office. One is in professional, I believe, and the other is early childhood. No, I'm sorry. Professional is 4. Number 3 is formative. Number 2 is formative years. So with the formative years, with Lincoln sitting on the log, looking at the book, you can see it on his thumb. You can see it on the rest of his fingers sometimes. You can see it on the book. You can even see it on the log. There's a variety called a cracked log where there's a die break on the log itself. But the 2009s are really cool for that. There's so many different varieties. I personally collect them. I really have fun with them. I just got some more rolls in. Thank you, Jeremiah. I'm going to be looking through some of them and see what I can find. My other super specialty is the latest Nebraska one, which is the Homestead Monument. I actually had a chance to be there at the first day release at the Homestead Monument here in Nebraska, and I've actually found a couple of different ones that were not found before. I found snow on the roof, lightning hitting this chimney. You know, you look at all these coins, and the best way I can say is look through a roll of the same coin. You're looking at it at one after another, after another, after another, and it's easier to pick up the different oddities on that denomination and variety of coin. And John, if you'd like me to, I've got a handout that gives you a basic breakdown of all of the different kinds of varieties on the 2009 Linkers. I can put them out there on our site for everybody to download that wants them.
Sure. I've got rolls and rolls of cents I've never gone through. So.
Yeah, well, we'll go ahead and put that out there tomorrow, and we'll.
I'll let you know if I find any.
Yes, please do. I'm always interested when people find them on their 2009 Lincolns. Those are probably the most overlooked of any of the denominations and years, and yet there's a large amount, literally a plethora of different DDRs and DDOs on the 2009s, because you've got 4 different varieties of them. Okay. Well, that pretty much ends this. I looked and I thought I had another page, but I had a Windows print test page somehow mixed up in this. But never stop learning. Ask questions. And now's the time to ask them. I'll answer them the best way I can. If I can't answer them, I'll go ahead and I'll look it up and I'll get back to all of you. Any
I'm
questions?
assuming you're not worth a lot of money. You know, you find a penny that's got a little doubling on it. It's a common date. You know, I mean, why do people look for them? Just for the fun of the chase, or is there any financial reward?
Well, with machine doubling, not unless you run across a collector that is really heavily into collecting machine doubling or collecting errors. The double dies are where the money is at. You'll see when I put a group of error coins up, I'll have a bunch of machine doubling, usually from die fatigue, die deterioration. But there's not a whole lot of money in that. You might be able to get 50 cents to $1 on them. When I sell them in a group is when I actually make money, because I have between 2 and 5 actual errors that I put in with the group each time. And the others are just sort of to make up the lot, and they're not worth a whole lot of money. But I still cherry pick through rolls. If you can hold on for a second, my wife is waving her hand saying that she has a question. So let's see what that is. Okay, Sharon asked me, is the double die, is that on the master? I'm going to throw it out to you folks and see what you answer. Yes or no?
No,
John, you have an opinion?
no, there's no, the master is fine. It's just a strike. A
Yeah.
hubbing.
Yep. How about you, Jeremiah?
Depends. I mean, you have the design doubling as well, right?
Yeah.
So is that technically, I mean, is that what you're covering in this as well? You said like the 42/1.
Yeah.
That was design, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. There were 2 different hubs or dies that were used. There was one with the 1942, one with the 1941. So it wasn't anything on the master die or the working dies themselves. It's the way the striking happens. Okay, honey? Very rarely that could be an engraving mistake. But that usually does not get into circulation, because they would break that initial engraving. Yep. See with the engraving process, gentlemen, to cover this quickly, and Sharon too. They first start with about a 12 to 14 inch diameter clay blank, and they do the engraving on there. Then they put it on a machine that runs something similar to a CAD program, a real sophisticated CAD program, and it takes what's on there and puts it onto the master die. And then all your other dies are taken off. It's all done computerized after the master engraver makes the initial engraving. Now, sometimes I have heard from reliable sources that it's given back to the engraver to fix something on the master die. But what you have to figure too is that once the master die is cut, there's at least 6 machines that are putting out working dies, because each die is used for approximately 300,000 coins, which only takes, well, they do at least 10,000 coins an hour at a slow rate. You figure it's less than 1 day for most of that. And the one that I have, it was used 320 strikes and it had a die break that went right up the side of the hub and right into the die. So you would have an actual die break in that coin. Any
I had
other?
a question also about Indian cents.
Yes.
So I met Eagle Eye Rick Snow, and he keeps creating new varieties.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll find enough of the coins that have the same error, and then he'll call it a variety. And then if NGC or PCGS agrees, and
Yes.
then puts it on the slab, then it becomes like, official. It goes in the book then as a
Yeah.
variety. But he's making money, I think, by creating varieties because people have to start collecting the varieties after they've already got all the 1896s that they, thought they had. Now there's suddenly a new one.
Exactly. On the Homestead Quarter, uh, there is a hand pump outside of a cabin, and there's a bucket right underneath the hand pump. There are at least 8 varieties of that: a dripping bucket, a cracked bucket, an overflowing bucket. They're all different varieties, and when they get approved, and you usually find them in the next edition of the Cherry Pickers Guide, and that's when the money really comes in.
Bill Fivas,
Pardon me?
the guy with the cherry pickers is Bill Fivas.
Yes.
Fivas. I think his name is, yeah.
Yeah.
His new book is coming out now, right, this year?
Yes. Yes, it's already been released at some coin shows around the country. But that's one thing that I always keep on hand. And then I get another book that comes out every year that has all the errors that were found in that year. Let's see, do I have that next to me? Yes. Let me see if I can hold this up so you can see it. It's going to be in reverse, but that's the 2019. I'm going to be ordering the 2020 very soon. It's got it's got double dies, off center, striking errors, planchette errors, repunched mint marks, and variations. And they've all been certified by either NGC or PCGS. And that's a book that if you're into errors that I really recommend. I find it easier to find the errors in it, the ones that appeared this year or in the year that this was published, because then you don't have to wait for all of them to come out with a new Cherry Pickers Guide, which doesn't come out every year. So that's the
what's
advantage
book
to that.
again?
The book is called well, this year's is called the 2020 U.S. Error Coin Guide, and it's by Stan McDonald, MC capital DONALD. I know Amazon has it. Runs about $20 to $25 is what the list is, but you can find it for less, especially if you go
Yep,
after
I found it.
especially if you go after 2019. What's the price for it now?
So on eBay, there's a listing for $20.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think the list price is $24.99 or $25.99, so that's a pretty decent price. But that's a good book to have that will fill in the gaps between Cherry Pickers Guides. And you know how expensive they are when they come out.
That's right.
They're about $60 to $75 a set.
So these are just the ones that come out or that are being found that year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, for the most part. They do have some in here that are a bit older that they just cover briefly, like the Bugs Bunny Ben Franklin.
Okay.
They found it in some other years besides just the
Oh yeah, a bunch of years.
1955. Yeah. So they'll upgrade that particular thing, and it looks like it's a redo, but it just lists all of them again and lists the new ones in with it.
Cool.
But the gentleman does it every year, and I think he does a really good job. The pictures are nice, sharp, black and white. It's not spiral bound. That's the only thing that I wish they would do. Hey, any other questions? Okay, my plan is to post this out on the Coin Lovers site on or about Tuesday. And I'll get that guide out there for the 2009 Lincoln Cents. And the next one that we'll be doing is part 2 of this, and that deals with doubling, primary machine doubling. And I've also found out from recent sources that one of the types of machine doubling has been debunked and it no longer exists. And people have been using that since at least 1986. So they folded it back into one of the others. So that should be pretty interesting.
Are you going to cover both then?
Which?
The one that was debunked and then
Yes.
what they put it into? Okay.
Yep. Uh-huh. Whereas they rolled it back into one of the other. And it's a very interesting story behind it. One person, not to give you a little teaser, I'm not going to mention the name or the type of machine doubling, but this person came out and declared there were 2 varieties of this type of doubling. And he supposedly quoted mint workers and quoted other people in the mint, and the mint has totally denied it, and has also said that they cannot find one. No one can find one that looks like this, only this particular person. So it's very interesting. It's been a subject of debate for a number of years, and now it's finally being debunked totally. Okay, gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Lee, for that presentation. Very informative.
I'm glad.
Yes, thanks.
My
Hey,
pleasure.
look at this.